Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing another movie review, so hopefully you find this one interesting. This movie is a science fiction drama from France, English language, released in the year 2019, directed by Claire Denis, and this film is called High Life. So High Life is set in the future, and you've got a group of people who are in this spacecraft who are just floating around. Now they're floating around for reasons that I'm not going to give you, but this man wakes up and he has a young daughter, and he believes it's his responsibility to raise his daughter, but because the situation he's facing is very uncertain, he doesn't know whether or not there is a future for them, therefore doesn't know whether or not life is worth living. So as he's floating around in a pointless existence, he has to try and get the will to live in order to give his baby some sort of happiness. So whether or not he can is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on High Life. If you thought that synopsis was very vague and not really giving you out much, it's definitely for your benefit, because this is one of the hardest films that I've had to actually think about and review, is because it is very, very French. If you're aware of Claire Denis as a director, you know that you're going to get yourself into something very, very different, and High Life is definitely that type of film. This is a movie that's going to have a fan base, but it's also going to have a lot of people hating it. It's because the movie it's a very artistic kind of film, and with European cinema, it doesn't follow conventional storytelling. This movie doesn't really follow a particular story as such. It's more about human beings facing the adversity of monotony. And so for that reason, it does work against it, which is a major criticism I have of the film. But to start off with, as I said, it is very, very European. They have a very different way of telling a story. So this is a science fiction film, and you're basically these people floating in uncertainty, but that's ultimately what the film is. Yes, on one hand, it is a science fiction movie, but on the other hand, it is floating around with no real direction in life. It's floating around with uncertainty, not really knowing what the future is going to bring, and so that does bring a level of panic, and that level of panic is actually brought through the screen, through the boredom that the movie depicts. And for the first half of this film, I thought the boredom that's seeping through into these characters is starting to seep through in the viewer and actually giving you a very psychological, sort of damaging movie. And so Claire Denis directed another movie quite a while ago called Trouble Every Day, which is about a cannibal, and that was a romance story, and that was a very different kind of romance film, whereas this movie is a very different kind of science fiction film. And so it is a very spaced out kind of film. It's a very hallucinogenic movie, and I felt as though this wasn't quite reality, is that I was feeling as though I was a little bit unnerved, and that psychological tension that the French know how to create so well is actually present in High Life, and that's the best part of the movie, is that it is very different. The way it's shot, the movie, it does go between, present day as far as filmmaking is concerned, and then there is some cinematography that reminded me of movies from the 60s and 70s. And so yes, it is floating through space, and the movie is, as I said, set in outer space and through basically pointlessness, but I actually felt as though I was going through different decades as far as film is concerned as well. And so I thought that was really riveting and had a very haunting sort of atmosphere. And so it all creates something that is different. It is very art house. It's not something that you see very often in film, and that's what you would expect from Claire Denis. So you've also got some fairly intriguing performances from Robert Pattinson as the main character. This guy can actually act. After watching Twilight, you wouldn't think this guy has any acting chops, but he actually does a fairly decent job in this movie, and there's been numerous other films where he actually demonstrates his level of ability. And to actually act in a Claire Denis film, you know that you're going to get a very challenging role. So you've also got Mia Goth, who stars in the movie, and also Juliette Binoche. And Juliette Binoche, a very beautiful veteran as far as French cinema is concerned. And all these characters and all these actors, they have a very challenging role. Claire Denis puts them in some very taboo situations, whether it's nudity, whether it's sexual acts. It is very challenging for an actor to do this. And so these actors are actually putting themselves on the line and actually challenging themselves to see how far they will go. And I thought they actually do their roles in a very impressive fashion. And so you would think to yourself, with a movie that doesn't really go to many places, the actors wouldn't really be testing themselves to a degree, but Claire Denis manages to actually put them out of their comfort zone, and will actually put the viewer out of their comfort zone, because there is some very extreme material as far as sexuality is concerned. So sexuality, there's a few violent moments the movie has, but the movie does center upon sexuality and humanity, and the sexual taboos that the people outside of Europe have. It demonstrates how secure the Europeans are as far as sexuality and nudity is concerned. So if you are sensitive to that kind of thing, High Life is definitely not for you. And yeah, so be warned. So yeah, it is a very challenging movie. It is a very interesting film, but unfortunately the interest really isn't capitalised too much, and the movie gets way in over its head. It's a very ambitious film, and it's soaking in its ego to a point where it doesn't realise it's soaking in its ego. And so after a while I thought to myself, well, you're just showing off. Is that it goes for about 30 minutes too long. And that is because it's Claire Denis it gets absorbed in her own sort of ability, her own standard, where I thought to myself, okay, well, now it's just a collection of randomness. And the whole film is centered, as I said, upon pointlessness and the fact that humanity trying to thrive under really challenging conditions. But after a while, you want a little bit more to evolve the story, but the evolution of the story never really comes. And so, yes, it is very different, but the director is playing on that difference to a point where it does start to exhaust all of its interest, and therefore it does become very monotonous. It does become very tedious. And the whole experience of these characters in this situation facing tedium, I felt as though I was facing what they were facing in all the wrong ways. This is not something you want from a cinematic experience. This is something that isn't. This unfortunately is something that can that can backfire as far as art house is concerned. Sometimes you can get lost in art house to a point where the viewer starts to think, okay, well, this is just pretentious. Now, yes, it is pretentious to start with because it is very different, and the director does go to very different avenues as far as telling a story. But unfortunately, it just doesn't have enough. It just exhausts itself, and the final 30 minutes is an absolute chore to get through, and you kind of forget everything the movie has going for it in a good way, and you start to think, all right, well, I'm definitely not going to watch that movie again. So if you are a fan of European cinema, High Life demonstrates everything that is good about European cinema, but also everything that is wrong with European cinema as well. And so some directors can really nail this type of thing, but unfortunately Claire Denis gets lost in herself, gets lost in her ability to create something different, and it just becomes a little bit of a superficial experience by the end, and it's an end that I definitely wasn't excited about. So overall, I'm not really going to recommend this to the average viewer, but if you are definitely a European film fanatic and this sounds like your kind of thing, definitely give it a shot, but it's definitely for a very acquired taste, and as a result of that, I'm going to give High Life 2 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next, thank you for watching movies, and I'll see you later.